Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Psalms in Hebrew and Comparative Translations. This morning, we are studying Psalm 12, and we're going to start a little differently from the way we've been starting. Most of the time, we start by reading the psalm, but today I'd like to start with a more conceptual question, which is, do you believe that there are like absolute truths? Like, do you believe that there are things that are true with a capital T? Don't answer right away. We're starting today with a conceptual question as opposed to with jumping right into the psalm. Don't worry, we're going to get to the psalm. But the conceptual question is this: do you believe that there exist absolute truths, capital T, universal truths? And if you think that they exist, do you think that human beings have access to them? And so we're just going to think about that question. All right. Did anybody have a thought? Yeah, Henry.
My mind immediately went to to science and how science, the truth in science, seems to evolve. So who knew about black holes? Now we think about black holes. What's beyond that? We put up a telescope in the sky, and all of a sudden we're finding out so much about what we never thought was possible or existed. So I can't believe in absolute truths in that aspect. I can't go further yet.
All right. So Henry points out that in some realms of the world, including in science, which is the study of understanding how the world works, we find that sometimes the more we know, the more we have to revise our hypothesis about how the world works. And so things that we thought might have been really true, when we learn new facts, when we have new observations, it shows that those previous truths were not absolute truths. They were not, and so maybe that experience pushes us in the direction of thinking maybe there aren't absolute truths. Maybe there are, but we don't know. And that's as far as we can maybe say. All right. So was that a fair restatement of what you said, Henry?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Larry, I think I saw your hand. You have to unmute.
Agreement. In fact, philosophy of science says we don't try to prove truth, we try to corroborate or disconfirm. And you look for a pattern which you call laws, then there are higher order laws called theories, all of which are subject to reformulation as new evidence comes in. So the process of science, by its own definition, has no absolute truths, which is quite different from the spiritual realm, where we know in this realm everything is probabilistic. But the definition of truth would correspond one for one with the definition of God. God is that which creates. And in the creation, that is the absolute.
All right. So Larry says in the world of science, science isn't about absolute truths. Science, by definition, is about measurable and testable hypotheses and laws and theories that are all subject to continual continual reformation as you learn more and as you can refine what the law is. But in the realm of the spirit, in spirituality, in our relationship with the divine, there, separate from science, we can say maybe there are absolute truths, and one way to define God is as the source of absolute truth, or uh, or or that God as the creator of the universe, or God as the lawgiver, God God provides an access to universal or absolute truths that maybe we wouldn't access in other ways. Okay, nice.
No.
All right, so if in case you just arrived, we haven't even read the Psalm yet, Psalm 12. We are just talking about, is there absolute truths? Are there absolute truths? And do human beings have access to them?
No.
Mishka.
I know I'm just having come in late. I'm just going, wow, what a conversation. And that's only a few minutes worth. The conversation that's a lifetime's worth.
Great. So Mishka says, this is a big topic. I don't know if there are absolute truths or if there aren't absolute truths, but like thinking about whether there are absolute truths, that is a project that is a lifetime's worth of project. And in some way, that's sort of what the project of life is to try to figure out why and what and wherefore, and right, to try to understand, is there access to some kind of truth? Murray.
It is sort of a repeat of the original premise that Henry postulated. And I look at the question as being within the scope of the extent of our understanding. What truth is based upon the sum total of knowledge that we acquire at a certain point, as reflected by a certain universal baseline. But we as human beings and other creatures and the universe is continually evolving. And so our truth may evolve based upon the knowledge that we acquired as a consequence or as a result of the information and the knowledge we gain.
Do you think that is different in the realm of the natural world and in the realm of the world of the spirit? Or do you think that truths, that our understanding and conception of the truth of truth evolves also in the natural world and also in the realm of the spirit?
Exactly the latter.
All right. So Murray takes Henry's point one step further and responds in some ways to what Larry said. Well, actually, as we grow and change, our relationship with God grows and changes, and what we know about God grows and changes. And so even in the realm of the spirit, certain things are subject to continual refinement, and maybe there are some universal truths in that realm, but maybe we don't have access to them quite yet. Or maybe there aren't universal truths. Maybe there's just continual refinement. Yeah, Larry.
I would posit that there are universal truths at the moral level, which God reveals to us from time to time. We have trouble understanding what God means. We interpret God with our imperfect minds and knowledge, but God wants, he says, to make it accessible to us to know it. And there's a correspondence, interestingly, between the moral laws that God teaches and the physical world. And we just don't understand it yet. Equity, for example, entropy, justice. These are concepts that have relationship in the moral sense and also in the physical sense. But our understanding, I agree with you, is imperfect of both. So even though God does his best to teach us, he knows we're flawed, imperfect vessels and have trouble conceptualizing what God means. So he tries to give us parables and examples and metaphors and experiences that will guide us, I think.
All right. So Larry says, I'm very committed to the idea that there are universal truths. But I completely hear the point of view of other people in this class and in my own experience in life that universal truths are hard to access. And part of that is the limitations of us as human beings. Oh, but it sounds like you're very committed, Larry, to, at least in theory, there are universal truths that God has access to and which God wants us to be striving for access to. And maybe sometimes we actually do access some of them. And maybe sometimes we misunderstand what God means, and we lose sight of the divine picture. Mm-hmm. All right. Well, great. With this intellectual framework in mind, let's jump into the Psalm. So Psalm 12. And I did send the source sheet, though I sent it just before class started. So you got it in the email, and if you're the kind of person who wants to print it out, you do have it. All right. So I'll read it in Hebrew. Lamenatzeach ala shminit mizmor leDavid. Hoshia Adonai ki gamar chasid ki fasu emunim mibnei Adam. Shav yidabru ish et re'ehu sifat chalakot v'lev v'lev yidaberu. Yachreit Adonai kol siftei chalakot lashon midaberet gedolot. Asher ameru lilshonenu nagbir sifatenu itanu mi adon lanu. Mishod aniyim me'enkat evyonim ata akum yomar Adonai ashit beyesha yafiach lo. Imrot Adonai amarot torot kesef tzaruf ba'alil la'aretz mizukak shivatain. Ata Adonai tishmereim titzrenu min hador zu leolam. Saviv rishaim yitalachun kirum zulut livnei Adam. All right. Would somebody like to read translation in English? Let's do Rabbi Robert Alter's translation, which is on page 3 on the left. Henry.
To the lead player on the H-string lyre, a David psalm. Rescue, O Lord, for the faithful is gone, for vanished is trust from the sons of man. Falsehood, every man speaks to his fellow. Smooth talk, with two hearts they speak. The Lord will cut off all smooth-talking lips, the tongue that speaks of big things. Those who said, let us make tongue great, our own lips are with us. Who is master to us? For the plunder of the poor, from the wretched men's groans, now will I rise, says the Lord. I will set up for rescue a witness for him. The Lord's sayings, pure sayings, silver tied in a kiln in the earth, refined sevenfold, silver tried, sorry. You, Lord, will guard him, will keep him from this age for all time. All around go the wicked. They have dug deep pits for the sons of men. Depressing.
Yeah, so I guess what's depressing in some ways about this psalm is the beginning and the end of it, right? The beginning says, for the faithful is gone, right? Or over here on the right, for the godly one has ceased, the faithful have vanished. Right, there are no righteous people anymore. There are no people who speak the truth anymore. The loyal have disappeared from the human race. The faithful are no more, right? That's the beginning. And the end is also depressing. On every side, the wicked roam when baseness is exalted among men. All around go the wicked. The wicked walk to and fro, right? All around the wicked prowl up and down. Round about the wicked walk, right? So the beginning and the end have this depressing depressing assessment of the world. Like, yeah, there are no righteous people who speak the truth, and the wicked are free to walk around with impunity among humankind, right? But right in the middle, God says, now I shall arise. I will rescue the ones whom they blow away. Right? From the destruction of the afflicted, from the groaning of the needy, now I will arise. Because the poor are despoiled, because the needy groan, I will now rise up, says the Lord. So right in the middle of this psalm is this perhaps hopeful, perhaps also depressing claim that the poet is making, that God stands up for the poor. God stands up for the poor. All right. So Henry said it feels depressing. What are other people's reactions to this psalm?
I think it's aspirational.
Tell me more about that.
Well, it is. It does recognize the state of affairs among humans, but the higher authority that created the humans will eventually come and help reestablish the order that will result in fairness and treatment rescue. The only question I personally have is, how long, O Lord, shall we wait? How many more millennia shall we wait?
All right.
Sounds like Psalm 10. How long? How long?
Yeah.
Yeah, right. And that is a repeated refrain in the Psalms, where the psalmists they look at the reality of the brokenness of the world, and they say, how long? What are we supposed to wait around forever for salvation? Yeah.
Alter, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
Alter's translation is even more explicit about how out of the suffering of those who are ill-treated, God arises from the plunder of the poor, from the wretched man's groans. Now will I arise, says the Lord.
Right.
It's almost as if this is a moral description of equity, that the Lord, his unalloyed purity is equity. And when it gets out of balance, the Lord responds to restore. We just have to see it.
And in Hebrew, mi shod aniyim, me'en kat evyonim, from the shod of the aniyim, from the enkat of the evyonim. That's how Alter is translating that. Very true to what the Hebrew says. Yeah, Henry.
I'm curious about maybe thinking about the word poor and what does that mean? I mean, only the poor don't lie. Only the that this makes no sense to me unless the word poor is those of us who are not people who can be who are those of us who are controlled by some other source.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. I think it's not that it's not necessarily that the psalmist thinks that you can only be righteous if you're poor.
Right.
I think the psalmist thinks the the righteous poor have no power and are oppressed by the circumstances of their life. The wicked prey on the righteous poor. But there are definitely philosophical thoughts that suggest that, right, like Jesus says that it's harder to find a righteous, wealthy man than to stick a camel through the eye of a needle, right? Like, and so there, it's not that there aren't great teachers and philosophers who do wonder if wealth only comes to those who are ruthless enough to step on other people to get it.
He also said, blessed are the poor, blessed are the humble, blessed are the meek, that those who are full of themselves, who are rich in selfness, are the ones who are in trouble. That what God wants is the exalted are thrown down and the humble are raised up. There's a concept of equity in here, that a natural moral equity and a natural equity that this suggests to me.
Yeah. And I think this psalm is the psalmist, I think, is in a similar theological bend to some of those teachings from the New Testament, from the Christian scriptures. Yeah. Rabbi Spitzer.
I'm reading this slightly differently, or maybe a lot differently. I think what the psalmist is saying, God is saying, is not that only poor people can be righteous and wealthy people can't be righteous. I think what is being said here is that God is saying, here are all these people who are being oppressed, and because they're being oppressed, I, God, am going to stand up and do something about it. I think that the message here is doing something about it, giving help, doing something about it.
Great. Yeah. Yeah, I definitely think that right in the center of this psalm is a promise that God is going to stand up for the righteous, even though it seems in the beginning and the end of the psalm that there's no truth, no right, no justice. The wicked roam on every side, but God says, "No, I'm going to stand up for the righteous, and so should you, and so should you." Yeah, great. Okay, I'd like to turn to this question of how how is Psalm 12 used in the liturgy? Psalm 12 is, as those of you who are familiar with Jewish with our liturgy, right? There are no verses in this liturgy that are regularly no verses from this psalm are regularly quoted in our liturgy in the Jewish liturgical tradition, but there are a couple of very very obscure uses, which is that the nusach, the liturgical tradition of the Edot HaMizrach, the eastern tribes of Judaism, by which we mean, sometimes that's translated Oriental, by which we mean Jews who come from North Africa and the Arab lands. their tradition gives this psalm as the psalm for Shmini Atzeret, the psalm for the 8th day of Sukkot. I think, though I could not find any discussion of why, okay, I could not find any discussion of why this psalm was chosen. And our Sidur, Lev Shalem, picked Psalm 65 and not Psalm 12. But so I'm not sure why they picked this psalm, but if I had to hazard a guess, it would be that Sukkot is and the reading of Ecclesiastes, of Kohelet on Sukkot, is about like really understanding the power of words, right? So Shmini Atzeret is the last chance, with the gates of heaven closing and the power of praying for rain, and the importance of, right, it's the last chance to focus on the importance of guarding your speech, of going into the new year like recommitted to speaking the truth. My guess is that the theme of this psalm of truths and lies, of falsehood, that's probably where it comes from. And but I couldn't find any discussion of why the Edot HaMizrach Siddur picks this psalm. But it is used in its entirety on Shmini Atzeret in the Siddur of Edot HaMizrach. Verse 2 of this psalm which is, "Help, O Lord, for the godly man ceases, the faithful fail from among the children of men," right? That line is contained in the personal fast day prayers. Now, most folks do not anymore take on personal fast days. But why might you do it? Say you dropped your tefillin on the ground, or you were present when a Torah scroll fell on the ground. Then you might declare for yourself or for your small community an individual fast day, or a set of individual fast days that often take the form of fasting on a Monday, fasting on a Thursday, and fasting on the following Monday, or Bihab, because Bet is the second day of the week, that's Monday, and then Hey is the 5th day of the week, that's Thursday, and then Bet again the second day of the next week, Bihab. And this verse is contained in the special Salichot, the special penitential prayers for a Bihab fast day, for an individual set of 3 fasts that you declare for yourself. And there, it's contained in a 4-verse anthology that includes this verse and Kohelet, Ecclesiastes 7:20, and then part of a verse from Jeremiah 31, and part of a verse from Isaiah 45. And together it reads, "Help, Lord, for the godly man ceases, for the faithful fail from among the children of men. For there is not a just man upon the earth that does good and sins not. Save, O Lord, your people, the remnant of Israel. Israel shall be saved in the Lord with an everlasting salvation." So in that context, it's completely sort of overturned, I think, the sense of the psalm itself, which is that there are no loyal people, there are no truth-telling people, there are no faithful people anymore. And it says, oh, come on, none of us are pure, none of us are faithful. There is no person who is perfectly good and doesn't sin. We all sin. And then it turns to God and says, God, even though we sin, save us, help us out. And I think there's like a real power in using that verse that way. But again, I've brought this to you, but it's a very minor use of this verse. That is to say, I have not personally ever committed myself to a Monday, Thursday, Monday fast, and I suspect that many of us have not done that. and the fact that there are like special selichot penitential prayers for those fast days. I mean, we don't even have that passage in our Siddur. You have to go to an Orthodox Siddur to get that. Anyway, so that's the liturgical use of this psalm. Interestingly, Psalm 12 is not used regularly, and I do think that's interesting. Is it used more in other traditions? I don't know. James, is Psalm 12 used in the Christian liturgical in your liturgical tradition?
Well, we go through the Psalms if we do our daily prayers, morning and evening prayer, and so as a course, it comes up the second Monday of the month. Interesting, though, in the Protestant tradition, Martin Luther wrote a hymn based on this, and Johannes Sebastian Bach wrote a cantata that was performed just after in the early summer. So it has come up, but not regularly, other than in the course of reading the song.
Right. I mean, right. We also read Psalms. There's a cycle of reading the Psalms over the course of the month. And folks who do that will, of course, read Psalm 12. Or if you find yourself doing Shmirah, if you find yourself guarding a person who has died, it's customary to read the book of Psalms while you're doing that. So then if you did that, you would come upon Psalm 12. But that isn't the same as but it is interesting that that Bach wrote something to this with this as the words, and that Martin Luther found it meaningful. Yeah. So we haven't done a lot of thinking about the structure of the Psalms, but I did find the center, the way that this psalm sort of begins and ends the way it does, and centers this idea of God's promise to stand up for the poor. I did find that the psalm is structured in such a way as to draw attention to that, and so that's this here. James Hamilton Jr. is the evangelical writer of this translation from the Evangelical Bible Theology Commentary. But he also has in his commentary a description of each psalm, and in this one he says, after the description of those who assert that there is no God in Psalm 10 and the response to their threats in Psalm 11, Psalm 12 presents a contrast between the words of the wicked and the words of God. At the center of the psalm, we find the Lord's true words, a declaration that God will arise on behalf of the persecuted and the oppressed. And then he describes the chiastic structure, which I did not keep in my quote here, all of his prose about the chiastic structure. But basically a chiasm is where is this sort of it's a structure where you can see the same thought repeated or a similar thought repeated in each section of the psalm, going in and out from the center. And not all psalms have that, and not all stories have that, but when it does have it, you can often learn something interesting by drawing out the chiasm, because you get a stronger sense of what's being compared. So in this case, right, the beginning and the end, right, have a description of the vanishing faithful and the strutting wicked. And then as you go in and come out from the center, you get a description of the empty words of the wicked contrasted against the pure words of God. And then right in the middle, you have this promise. So I'm curious to know if, if seeing it laid out that way, leads us to any conclusions or opens up the psalm for us in a different kind of way.
It certainly expounds and makes it more visual to see what Henry had said at the very outset, that the beginning and the end are balanced, are parallel, and then the words in the center, at least in one verse, really puts out the promise that God will vindicate the poor and the needy. The whole thing, though, is still that kind of structure is sort of implied in some of the other Psalms we've studied, but nothing nearly so dramatic as this is. And
yeah, I mean, the truth is, James Hamilton Jr. really loves chiasm, and he thinks all of the Psalms are chiastic. And so we could go back and I could share you his graphs for each of the Psalms. I found it was useful this time in a way that I didn't find it was so useful the other times.
Well, this one is, to me at least, much more dramatic in that, and I just didn't like it. Period. Ugh, was my response when it was first read. Yeah.
All right, so I appreciate that comment, right? Mishka's like, I didn't like this psalm,
No.
and certainly we're not gonna like every psalm that we read, and I do suspect that some of that also is connected to why it's not like regularly used in our liturgy. I think people, yeah. I think it's also good to connect to even psalms that our first reaction is, Murray.
The theme of the psalm, though, seems to be one that appears throughout our liturgy about coming to the rescue of the poor in everything, including in our Bechad HaMazon, all throughout. So this shouldn't be such a big surprise. And as for the depressing part, what we read in the House of Mourning about the people who don't pay attention in this world and straighten out and become more righteous, they'll go down into the ground and never see the light of day again. That seems to me a common theme.
Yeah.
There seems to be a flow to it, too, that as faithlessness increases, there's an emptiness in the world that's used by the wicked, and that leads God to deliver his promises in pure words of truth, pure words. And now the words are there, yet the wicked now go strutting about, that they find a different way to pervert the word. That they misuse the words of God, maybe another way to say that.
Nice. So what at the beginning of the psalm, the empty words of the wicked might be their own words. But in verse 9, we find that maybe the strutting that the wicked are doing is actually also perverting God's pure words.
False prophets.
Yeah, that's a very powerful thought. Yeah, I need to think about that some more. All right, so I wanted to bring, we started this whole week by talking about truth. And I think, right, the theme of this psalm is the power of truth. the power of truth to vindicate the poor, the power of truth. What are true words? Is there such a thing as truth? And indeed, the Koren Tehillim, which I brought several of their meditations before saying the psalm. The meditation before saying Psalm 12 is, it is a world of lies. Deceit and hypocrisy prevail. Falseness is used as a weapon to manipulate the naive and the gullible. I would love to encounter pure truth, but would I recognize pure truth even if I saw it? And so, right, what does it do to say that right before you read this psalm? Do you then recognize God's words as truth? Does it open up for you the possibility that there are pure truths? Are there pure truths? Would I recognize them? Do I have access to them? That's the question that we started with at the beginning. And the Breshit Rabbah, the Genesis Rabbah, has a wonderful midrash on this topic that I brought. So here, a midrash about truth. Rabbi Shimon said, when the Holy Blessed One began to create Adam, the first human being, the ministering angels formed themselves into factions, groups, and parties. Some of them said, yeah, create people, go for it, human beings, woo! And others urged, don't create human beings, don't create the first Adam. And how do we know that this happened? We know because there's a verse in Psalms that says, loving kindness and truth met, justice and peace kissed. Right. So these are they're arguing with each other. Okay. Loving kindness said, all right. Chesed says, okay, let human beings be created, because human beings will dispense acts of chesed. Human beings are full of love for each other. But truth said, let Adam not be created, because human beings are full of lies. Justice said, let Adam be created, because Adam will perform acts of justice. And peace said, let humanity not be created, because human beings are constantly quarreling. Now, before we keep going, I just want to point out, right? Their irony in peace saying, oh, don't create human beings, they're constantly quarreling in the midst of a quarrel between the ministering angels, right? That is supposed to be ironic, okay, I think. I think the creator of this story understood the humor in that. Okay, but peace, yeah.
That's why the name Israel. He wrestles
Right.
with God.
Right. Human beings are strugglers, right? Okay, but here the angels are also in factions. They are full of strife. Okay, but who's on which side? Chesed and Tzedek are on the side of, okay, create human beings, and Emet and Shalom, right? Truth and peace are on the side of, don't create human beings. They're full of lies, full of war, full of fighting. No, don't do it. So what did God do, right? You might say, okay, God served as the tiebreaker, and God voted with the two, right? It's a tie. Two angels said create human beings, two angels said don't create human beings. So one way to break the tie would be for God to just vote with one side or the other. But God doesn't do that. God takes hold of truth and casts it to the ground, as it says, and truth will be sent to the earth, which is a quote from the book of Daniel. Oh, okay. So in other words, God acts as the tiebreaker, but now God doesn't even have to vote. Now it's just 2-1, right? Chesed and tzedek, loving kindness and justice, are on one side, and only peace, shalom, is on the other side. Because truth has been cast out of heaven. And the ministering angel said before the Holy One, Sovereign of the universe, why do you despise thy seal? Let truth arise from the earth. Hence it is written, let truth spring up from the earth, which is a quote from Psalm 85. Ve'emet me'aretz titzmach. All right. So I think this midrash, which imagines, right? Why do we have this midrash? Because when God says, let us create human beings in our image. Who is the us in let us create? Right? So this midrash imagines that God is taking counsel with the angels. And here the angels are like the avatars of love and justice, of truth and peace. Okay, so these are like the angels of love and the angel of truth, right? All right, so I think what this midrash is really talking about is this idea of universal truths. Are there universal truths? Maybe there is a universal truth. Maybe there is a truth to the fact that human beings are full of lies. But God says, no, there's not going to be any more universal truths in heaven. I'm going to take the angel of capital T truth, and I'm going to throw out that angel out of heaven to earth, where truth will spring up from the natural world, just as Henry described at the beginning, right? The more we learn, the more we are able to understand and know more about the truths. But there isn't necessarily a heavenly truth. There's just truths that we learn in the natural world. Rabbi Mendel of Kotsk, he also talked about this midrash, and he asked, what is the angel of truth doing ever since being cast to the earth? Wandering around for all these millennia, taking the form of the rare, truthful human being, right? So sometimes you meet a person who really is somebody who speaks the truth. And that says Rabbi Mendel of Kotsk, that's the incarnation of truth wandering around on earth. All right, so what do you think about thinking about this midrash in the context of this psalm?
You should expect more lies from people than truth, but when you catch the truth, a drift of it, cling to it.
Nice.
Gives us hope.
Yeah, there's hope. There is hope in this idea, right? Plus, then God did end up creating human beings. So here we are.
I wonder, looking at this, why did God not send peace also to the earth to be something that has to arise and be almost tangible, the way we think about truth needing to be almost tangible? That
it's an interesting question, right? Like our most common liturgical phrase about peace is about peace in the heavens, right? Oseh shalom bimromav, the one who creates peace on high, please also create peace down here. So I think it's easier for us to imagine, or maybe it's more Jewish, I don't know, to imagine heavenly peace than it is for us to imagine universal truth. And it's maybe harder to imagine peace on earth than it is to imagine like the truths that naturally grow up from the earth. We're able to say, yeah, we can look at the world and have a sense of natural truths, moral truths, like truths that are drawn from our experience, truths that we refine over time, like silver, 7 times purified, right? Like it says in the Psalm. Yeah, Rabbi Spitzer.
But but I'm troubled by Rabbi Mendel of Kotz's interpretation here, because it seems to me that what he's saying is that the rare, truthful human being isn't really a human being. It's a personified angel of truth, and so no people are speaking truth. Whenever you see somebody who you think is a person speaking truth, it's really the angel of truth acting in that person's body. That's troubling.
I think it's more abstract than that. I think it's just sometimes people do have access to truth. I think that's what Rabbi Mendel of Kotzk is saying, right? Like, don't think that human beings don't ever have access to truth. It's this whole question that we're talking about from the beginning. Like, are there universal truths? Maybe, maybe not. Do we have access to them? Maybe, but maybe if we do, it's very, very rare. I think that's sort of the idea. Yeah, Henry.
So, of course, as we're talking, I had to look up the word truth, and I came upon a model that uses 4 truths: objective truth, normative truth, subjective truth, and a thing called complex truth. And so here you have this one word that may be very different in different circumstances.
Nice. Yeah, Rabbi Spitzer, I think you.
I guess maybe I think he hit the nail on the head there, in the sense that when you're talking about somebody who speaks the truth, does that mean that what they're saying is something that's true, that they believe to be true, or does that mean that they have some universal principle of truth? Is the difference between a universal principle of truth and something that's not a lie?
Well, right. I mean, I think that's right, right? Like, there are lots of people who try very hard not to lie. It can be very challenging because we also lie to ourselves constantly, and people can say things that they think are true, but are demonstrably false. But and then is that person lying? Not exactly, because that person believes what they're saying is true. So that's not the same as a lie. That's sort of just being mistaken. So yeah, I mean, I think that's right. But then this concept of sort of a bigger truth, like, do we have access to that? Yeah. Yeah. Mishka, did you have something you wanted to add?
No.
Larry.
Yeah, another thought that rises from looking at these 3 midrash is, don't look for peace on earth, it's not here, but look hard for truth because it is accessible here.
Yeah, I definitely think that there's something to that, right? And that goes to Mishka's question about why didn't God also cast peace down, right? I guess, right, from the perspective of the math of this, right? You don't need to get rid of all of your dissenting voices. In fact, it's good to have dissent, right? But you can't have an even numbered tie, because then you're going to split your people apart, right? In this case, your angels. So by changing the dynamic so that it's 2 against 1, right? You still have a dissenting voice, but you also have a clear majority, right? A clear majority. And the Midrash goes on to say, while the angels were arguing, God just went ahead and created Adam anyway, and then said, "Why are you fighting? I just created Adam. It's over. It's done. Human beings already exist. Stop fighting about it." Anyway, I think, right, but the math of it isn't as important as what Larry is saying, which is, yeah, I mean, I think when we look around in our world, we do see glimmers of truth, like hidden kernels of truth. We see a process by which we could understand truths. But peace, like completion, fullness, wholeness, like that seems very shaky on earth. It is hard to imagine that. That it's easier to imagine Bimromav, in God's heavens, right? The heavens, that there's some peace in that distant realm. Maybe.
Here, the treasure in the field and the pearl of great price is truth, not peace.
Right. Right.
Yeah,
All
but
right,
should
yeah.
we wait a little bit? I mean, it's only limited ability within our intellectual capacity, but we have to give a little bit of weight to the fact that this is based upon a midrash as opposed to another source.
Yeah, right. It's a story that's, I think, trying to teach or to speak to some kind of understanding of the world. All right, so we'll close out with this with spiritual applications from Rabbi Richard Levy, his explanation of the psalm. He writes, "Death and life," we read in Proverbs 18:21, "are in the power of the tongue." In this psalm, the poet, for whom words are the substance of life, which I think is a great insight, right? This is a poem ultimately, and a poem is words, right? Words carefully crafted. In this psalm, the poet, for whom words are the substance of life, contrasts the sevenfold pure words of God with the treacherous words of the wicked, which along with their actions contribute to the brutality suffered by the poor. The psalm can be thus seen as a challenge to us who speak. Which words shall we use? What is the nature of our lips and our tongue? Shall we speak the kind of words God used to create the life of the world? Or shall we pervert the words God created to commit our own kinds of brutality? Language itself can be harsh. People who use crude speech prowl up and down all around us, and it can be hard to keep our own tongues purified of violent or sexually crude speech. But the model suggested here is God's own. We must refine our speech, thinking about the words we use, thinking of words as nuggets of shining silver, refined through careful thought and sensitivity, to emerge from the seashore of our lips with the purity of water drawn from a cool, fresh stream. Aside from the fact that I think he goes a little bit overboard here on mixed metaphors at the end, I think it's a really nice thought. Yeah, I don't need the seashore of my lips. I thought that the purity of silver 7 times refined was good enough as a metaphor, but okay. All right. So thank you, everybody. And next week we'll do Psalm 13. Before we close, I just wanted to remind folks that today is Yom HaZikaron, the day of remembrance, honoring the fallen in Israel's wars and also in the in terror attacks, and that tonight begins Yom HaAtzmaut, the celebration of Israel's independence, which celebrates 75 years of independence of the state of Israel, and is a truly important and wonderful celebration. And this evening, there is a local Tekes Ma'avar, a ceremony of transition between the solemnity of remembering the fallen and honoring the power of the joy of independence. It's not an accident that these are paired, right? Only we can only celebrate freedom acknowledging the cost of that freedom, and that's why Israel Memorial Day is always the day before Israel Independence Day. So thank you, and see you next week.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.